Scott's Tots is the episode most Office fans skip, and honestly, I get it. It is genuinely painful to watch. But here's the thing, the cringe is not the point. The cringe is the cover. Because underneath that uncomfortable classroom scene is something the show was never supposed to say out loud. This was not a man failing to keep a promise. This was an institution letting him trade children's futures for his own ego. And nobody stopped it. Here's what gets me before we even start the analysis. The documentary crew filmed these kids for 10 years. They were there the day Michael made the promise. They watched those children grow up believing a regional paper company manager was going to fund their college education. They kept rolling. They scheduled shoots. They cleared releases. And at no point in a decade did anyone connected to that production or to Dunder Mifflin Corporate look at the footage in their archive and say out loud that this was going to end badly for real children. That question bothered me the first time I really sat with this episode. It bothers me more now. The promise as Ponzi scheme. I want to be honest about where I started with Scott's Tots. I used to think it was just the most unwatchable episode in the series. The kind of television that makes you leave the room because secondhand embarrassment has a physical ceiling. I was not analyzing it, I was surviving it. When I actually looked closer, I realized I had been doing exactly what the show needed me to do. I was feeling the cringe and missing the crime. And in 1997, MichaelScott walked into a third-grade classroom and told those children he would pay for their college education. He was not a wealthy man. He was not a wealthy man's associate. He was a mid-level sales employee at a regional paper distribution company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He had no trust fund. He had no investment portfolio. He had no plan. What he had was a room full of 8-year-olds looking at him like he was a miracle. And he needed that feeling more than he needed the promise to be real. That is not a character flaw. That is a structural pathology. Michael did not lie to those kids the way a con artist lies. He lied to them the way a gambler promises his family the next hand is going to fix everything. He genuinely believed the version of himself that was rich enough and good enough to follow through. And the tragedy is that the belief was always for his benefit. The debt was always theirs. By the time season 6 arrives, those students are about to graduate high school. 17 or 18 years old. College applications submitted. Financial aid forms filled out counting on money that was never coming. Michael shows up to the classroom with a bag of laptop batteries. Lithium batteries. Not tuition, not even a symbolic check. Batteries. And the show frames that as the punchline. But the punchline only works if you agree to laugh instead of calculate what those kids actually lost. The evidence stack, the easiest reading of MichaelScott is that he is a well-meaning idiot. That reading is wrong and the series itself proves it, if you know where to look. Pull back to Prince's family paper in season 5. Michael is sent to gather intelligence on a small family-owned competitor. He befriends them. He genuinely likes them. And then he delivers the intelligence that contributes to their destruction. He feels bad about it afterward. He articulates that feeling bad is very painful for him. He does not connect the feeling to the action in any way that would change his behavior next time. That is not ignorance. That is a very specific relationship with consequence where the emotional processing exists entirely for the benefit of the person who caused the harm. Pull forward to the banker episode, where a Sabre representative arrives to audit Dunder Mifflin before the acquisition. The entire episode is constructed from clips of documented behavior. Michael's behavior across years. There's something almost too convenient about the way the documentary crew's archive becomes the mechanism by which Michael's institutional dysfunction is presented as content rather than evidence. The banker never once asks whether any of this footage should have triggered an HR intervention years earlier. It just catalogs it. Cheerfully, and here is what gets me about the extended and deleted footage from the Scott's Tots Superfan episode. In broadcast, Michael is oblivious right up until the classroom. He genuinely seems to be operating in a fantasy where something will work out. But in extended scenes and the deeper Superfan cuts, there are moments where Michael's awareness flickers. where he understands the shape of what is coming and chooses the performance over the exit. He knows the donation is not coming, and he knows the batteries are insulting. He walks in anyway because walking out would mean the crowd never cheers. That surprised me. I had given him more credit for pure delusion than the footage actually supports. The extended material suggests MichaelScott is not unaware of reality. He is addicted to overriding it. This matters because it connects to a well-documented real-world pattern. Jean Mulero, Frank Abagnale, even more recently large-scale charitable pledge scandals where wealthy or semi-prominent figures announce massive educational commitments to underserved communities, and then quietly fail to deliver. The communities celebrate. The local press publishes the story. The benefactor builds a reputation on the promise alone. That by the time the money does not arrive, the goodwill has already been banked, and the window for accountability has quietly closed. MichaelScott ran the same operation on a smaller scale with less self-awareness, and a documentary crew filming every frame of it. The HR paradox in this episode is one of the show's most underanalyzed structural crimes. Toby Flenderson is present throughout this series. He is the human resources representative whose literal function is to protect the company and its employees from liability. He has documentation on Michael going back years. He knows about the promise. There is no plausible world in which a decade-long pledge to fund a classroom full of minors' college educations does not appear in someone's HR file at some point. And yet Toby does nothing. He complains, he sighs, he loses. But he does not escalate. He does not report to corporate. He does not trigger any formal process that might have forced a resolution years before these kids submitted college applications. Toby's non-intervention is not passivity. Under any reasonable institutional reading, it is complicity. The show plays it for sympathy. That is the trick. I want to say something slightly uncomfortable here about why audiences laughed at this episode instead of asking these questions, including me. We laughed because the show gave us Michael's face to focus on, his panic, his desperation, his awful song. The camera stayed tight on his humiliation, and we processed the episode as his suffering. The kids became props in his story. That framing was a choice. The documentary crew made it, and we accepted it. Now, and I think that acceptance tells us something about how well the show had trained us by season 6 to experience Michael's discomfort as the primary emotional event in any room he entered, even when that room contained the actual victims. Hit like if you think the documentary crew were the real villains here. Because I went back and forth on that one for a long time before I landed where I did. The crew as predator class. The most uncomfortable argument in this entire analysis is also the one I believe most completely. The documentary crew are not neutral observers. They are a production company with footage rights, archive access, and a decade-long financial relationship with content generated by MichaelScott's instability. They were present the day the promise was made. They scheduled a return shoot 10 years later specifically to document the day it fell apart. That is not documentary journalism. That is content farming. They knew what was in the archive. They knew what the outcome was going to be. They built an episode around the collapse of children's futures because it was compelling television. David Wallace at Dunder Mifflin Corporate is the more conventionally legible villain here, but he is also in some ways the lesser one. Wallace received HR documentation. He received performance reviews. He had access to the same institutional record Toby was too defeated to escalate. At any point in a 10-year window, he could have quietly directed Michael to resolve the Scott's-Tot situation before it became a public humiliation involving current high school seniors. He did not. But whether that was negligence or cold institutional calculation that Michael's regional sales performance outweighed the liability of a broken promise to a group of children who did not work for Dunder Mifflin is something the show deliberately leaves ambiguous. I do not find it ambiguous. Michael was profitable. The kids were not on the org chart. The documentary crew is harder to prosecute because their culpability is embedded in a genre convention. Documentarians do not intervene. They observe. But the fly-on-the-wall defense collapses the moment you acknowledge that they did not stumble into this story. They scheduled it. They produced it. They framed it. They returned to those students not to give them a platform to discuss what had been done to them, but to capture Michael's reaction in the room. The kids' pain exists in the episode as
I want you all to
atmosphere.
be Buvons.
The camera is
okay?
not there for
Vaughn is a
them.
girl's name.
It was never there for them. And I think that is the argument the show accidentally made, that it was never equipped to fully reckon with. The documentary within the show is not a record of events. It is a machine that converts human dysfunction into entertainment. And it needed Michael to be exactly this broken to keep running. The cost of what was taken. The batteries are the final insult, and they deserve to be treated as such. Laptop batteries retail for under $30. The implied cost of 4 years of college tuition in Pennsylvania in the mid-2000s was somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 per student, depending on institution. Michael did not arrive with a partial payment. He did not arrive with a scholarship referral or a letter from a foundation or even a handwritten apology that acknowledged the specific damage. He arrived with a bag of batteries and a song. The song is called Hey Scotty, which he performs with the students who had been practicing it for years as an expression of gratitude for money that was never real. The fact that they still knew the words is the most devastating detail in the episode, and the show treats it as a comedic beat. The missed scholarships are not theoretical. Students who believed they had a committed donor did not pursue alternative funding aggressively because they believed the funding existed. That is how pledge-based fraud operates in the real world. The promise crowds out the contingency plan. By the time the truth arrives, the application windows are closed and the aid packages are finalized. Some of those students likely went into debt they did not have to carry. Some likely did not attend college at all. The show never follows up. Michael moves on. The cameras move with him. And here is my verdict. Scott's Tots is not a cringe episode. It is a document of institutional abuse that the show encoded as comedy and trusted audiences to process as entertainment. MichaelScott is not the villain of this episode in the way that reading is most satisfying. He is the instrument. The villains are everyone who had the footage and the authority in the years and chose to use none of it to protect the people who actually needed protection. The documentary crew filmed a fraud being committed against children and called it a show. And we watched it, and we laughed, and the kids in that classroom never appeared on screen again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment behind. Until the next one.